Goodness. I'm glad you're with me today. Thank you very much. This is a show we've looked forward to for some time. We are in the middle of the Equal Rights Amendment again today, but today we've got the major league heavy hitters with us. I want you to know that. Phil Schlafly, Karen DeCrow are going to have a fight. Stay there. I'll be right back. I'm glad you're with me today. We have got the big major leaguers here today, all right? They were to be with us a couple weeks ago. They got snowed in New York and St. Louis and all sorts of places like that. Phyllis Schlafly is with me today, along with Karen DeCrow. I want you to meet these women. These are the two who have been really most involved in fighting about the ERA across the country. Let me read you just a little bit about these two so you know. Karen DeCrow is a lawyer in Syracuse, New York. She handles sex discrimination cases, specialty in constitutional law, has written 2 books, Young Woman's Guide to Liberation, published by Bob Merrill, and Sexist Justice. All right, this is Karen DeCrow. Then Phyllis Schlafly, you've met before, attorney at law, member of Illinois Bar, a journalist with a syndicated newspaper column that's distributed twice weekly on Copley News Service, author of the Phyllis Schlafly Report, which is published monthly since 1967. These two are 2 women who have been at the forefront on both sides, on either side, on opposite sides, shall I say, of the Equal Rights Amendment. I'm glad they're with me today. Ladies, welcome to our show. Glad you're here.
Thanks, Richard.
I want today, as much as we can, now if we do this, it will be one of the great major miracles of the year, you realize this, but I would like for us to try to stick to the issues and let me take you from issue to issue, all right? There are 5 basic areas I'd like to cover. I'd like to talk about education and government power in one of our sections. Then I'd like to talk about military, the woman in the military. I'd like to talk about employment, and I'd like to talk about the family, how all which will sort of get us started here, I think. I'll start with you, Karen. You all have met many times. You've debated many times, I understand. When you think of Phyllis Schlafly, why do you think she, as you look at the opposition, why do you think she opposes the Equal Rights Amendment?
That's very difficult for a lawyer to look into someone else's mind. That's one of the first things we learn in first-year law school is you're never to, go behind what someone thinks.
You have to know your opposition, don't you?
You have to know your opposition, but it's really bad to, try and discuss what they're like on national television. I think the basic thing that the opposition to ERA centers around is somehow the concept that the Equal Rights Amendment or equality between men and women will destroy the family structure. Mm-hmm. And perhaps the issue that I try to stress is that I think relations between men and women will be better when they're put on an equal basis.
Do you think that she, and when I say she, Phyllis represents a whole group of people who oppose the Equal Rights Amendment, all right? Just as today you will represent the green folks who are for the Equal Rights Amendment, all right? When you think of the folks in general who oppose, I mean, do you think that they genuinely fear this thing? Do you think it's a lack of education on their part? Do you think that they're not aware enough of what the facts are? I mean, as you look at this, how do you...
Well, you certainly couldn't say Phyllis Schlafly's not aware of the facts. Phyllis Schlafly's a lawyer, so
yes.
Wouldn't say that.
Well, every lawyer doesn't know, but anyway, we won't get into lawyers.
I'd say that the crux of the matter may be not a failure of understanding. The crux of the matter may be a real difference in opinion on the appropriate roles for men and women.
Okay.
And if a person thinks that men and women are either because God ordained it, or because the social order has always been this way, or because biology is a certain way. If people think, for whatever the reason, that men and women should play very different roles, then they might want that codified in law. Mm-hmm. If, on the other hand, people feel that persons differ very much, but that men and women in general, it's very arbitrary, capricious, unreasonable, and really outdated to sort people into boxes of male, female for all their public activities, then if someone thinks that such a person, the Greens as you would call us today,
half this place is green today,
would say that it's really very archaic to have the laws reflecting that there are 2 different species in this world, male and female.
Phyllis, same question. As you look at Karen and all that she represents, the green forces, how do you view them as an opposition? I mean, why do you think she's for it?
I agree with a lot of what Karen said, and I think it is a difference in attitude, in point of view. They think that we should have a society in which you cannot make determinations that something is right for a man and not right for a woman, or vice versa.
A public determination.
A public determination by law. And we think that there are good reasons for treating men and women differently by law in a number of areas, and in the school system, in the military, and so forth. There are certain areas that are good to treat them the same, but there are other areas where we want to treat them differently. And so I think it is an attitude toward life, toward the sex roles of men and women.
I hear you. We should continue in just a minute. Stay there. Glad you joined us today. Karen DeCrow is my guest. Phyllis Schlafly is my guest. She's the green lady today. She's the red lady today. Why aren't you wearing green? It would have made it much easier.
I'm an individualist.
I see. Does purple stand for?
No, beige stands for
Just
camels.
being in the nice and the neutral, I understand. Guys, let's talk, ladies, let's talk about education, the whole area of education and the Equal Rights Amendment. There are some people, Karen...
I'm glad you recognize we're ladies and not guys, Richard.
Yes, well,
okay.
I threw that out. I realized what I'd done, and I tried to retract it, and it was already gone.
Persons, Richard,
Okay, persons,
right.
Listen, let's, how about, do you like persons? Let's vote on persons. Persons? Let's vote on ladies. Why would you be upset about calling a lady?
I'm not upset at all.
Oh, I mean, you don't
No
really
one could
expect
be
to be
less
called
upset.
a person.
No, I was teasing.
Oh, I thought you were. That's why I couldn't imagine these folks going crazy over here about it. Anyway.
All right, now listen, Richard. The Equal Rights Amendment isn't going to make anybody call anybody a lady or a person.
We know
but
that.
But what it will do is to get rid of all the sexist words in the laws, like ladies or gentleman or husband or wife or man or woman or boy or girl or male or female, and replace them in the law with the sex-neutral words like person or taxpayer or spouse and so forth. And it would give all the power to the federal government to do this. And
what is
that's
that going
one
to
of the
hurt,
reasons
Phyllis, if that were to happen? For instance, if in a marriage, if a person were to be called a spouse rather than a husband in the law, what would that hurt?
Well, you couldn't have a law that says a husband must support his wife, because a husband is a man. You know a husband is a man, a wife is a woman. See, everybody knows
that. I got that nailed down.
And if you change that to person must support person, or person must support spouse, it isn't the same thing at all. Now,
are you wanting that to happen? Are you wanting men not to have to support their wives, not to have to be responsible for their family?
Even the green people acknowledge that husbands are men. So we'll get that off the book.
Okay, but what about what Phyllis said about the legal aspect of this
Well,
thing?
what Phyllis said actually is very interesting, but it really isn't the Equal Rights Amendment that's doing that. In most states in this country, whether they have state equal rights amendments or not, for example, I practice law in New York State, which has no equal rights amendment. The laws are basically the domestic relations laws. Don't say husband and wife anymore. So to set up a specter that this will happen if and when the Equal Rights Amendment is passed is not quite accurate. I would say most laws...
Well, some states have done it anyway, but you don't have to do it. But under ERA, and you know that the Civil Rights Commission put out that book showing how the equality principle of ERA would make us get rid of all these sexist words. In fact, they even said in that report that under the equality principle, you would have to get rid of the male breadwinner, female homemaker concept.
That's not going to hurt women, though, because, which is, I think, the point that you're trying to make. If right now there are laws that talk about supporting spouse and dependent spouse, if in fact women are usually the dependent spouse, and if it's
but you see today she is the dependent. She can be the dependent spouse just because she's a woman. And
in very few states, and the Equal Rights Amendment doesn't really have that much to do with it, because in most states right now, the law is, as you would say, sex neutral when it comes to domestic
not
relations.
most states.
And
There are
the
a few
Supreme
states.
Court has ruled, as you know, that the alimony laws of, I believe it was Alabama, were unconstitutional without an Equal Rights Amendment.
Well, that's
because
right. Now, you consider that a great victory for women's lib, I guess, as the Supreme Court has now upheld a woman's right to pay alimony to her ex-husband. I just don't really see that as a great victory.
Do you not want women having to pay alimony to husbands?
I think it should be a matter of state law. Now, here's where we get it. No, but look,
What if she is the breadwinner? I mean, what if she's the one that's out making the money and the guy is staying at home washing the pots and pans or whatever you do
Well,
at home?
in our society, we don't have a lot of those. But the point in that case was, which is very relevant, which is very relevant to ERA, is that under our system of government, laws that pertain to marriage, divorce, alimony, child custody, and all those things were state laws. And under ERA, they become federal matters under Section 2 of ERA. Under Section 1, they become sex neutral, but under Section 2, they become a matter of federal control. And we think that Alabama or any other state ought to be able to define its own marriage, divorce, and alimony laws.
Are you wanting women to pay alimony?
I'll answer that in 1 second.
I can't get either one of you.
No, I will answer. You have my word. I will sit here till I answer it.
Okay. Which maybe next week. No,
I like it. We've just heard that the Supreme Court already has ruled on the Alabama divorce laws.
Now it's the alimony law. So alimony is no longer an ERA issue. Okay.
One of the major arguments given against the Equal Rights Amendment is that the federal courts will have the privilege or the responsibility or the duty to rule as to the constitutionality of state laws. You have just said that the Supreme Court has already struck down the Alabama divorce law economic provision, saying that women also should have to pay alimony to men if that's what the situation was, that she was supporting him. Now, I would say, therefore, one can either like that idea or not like that idea, that the Supreme Court has review of state laws, but the Equal Rights Amendment is not going to change that.
Yes, it would change it because the Supreme Court didn't have to rule that way in the alimony law. They did, but that doesn't mean that they always interfere with states' rights. But under ERA, we would be saying, Supreme Court, we are putting it up to you to tell us to resolve all these issues that we don't want to have to decide about. You do it. And we don't want to tell them.
You just said they had the right to decide it, but they didn't have to decide it.
I don't think, of course, in my view, they didn't have the right, but they just did it. You see, I think the Supreme Court does all kinds of things they shouldn't do.
Well, one of the major...
Well, but ERA would legalize it. It would authenticate it.
I'll answer your question in a second. If
I'm waiting.
One of the major arguments on why we don't need the Equal Rights Amendment, say to guarantee equal pay or something, is it's always stated that already the Supreme Court and the Constitution are making that possible, that women should get equality. Why do we need additional baggage in the Constitution? You've just said now they have discretion on domestic law.
Well, they did it, and they shouldn't have done it, but they didn't always do it. There are lots of other cases where the Supreme Court has ducked out, and you know there's another case where the Supreme Court said, we're not going to do that, we're going to wait and see if the Equal Rights Amendment is ratified.
Let me ask
and I don't want to
you
give
want
them
your question
more power.
No, I'll forget my question. Let me ask another question, all right?
Okay,
are you afraid of all that the federal court would take, like Phyllis is saying? I mean, we've seen the federal courts do some pretty weird things. Are you afraid at all that the federal court would take the Equal Rights Amendment, if it became law, and misuse it to the place that it would hurt families, to the place that it would keep the roles from being what some people want the roles to be in their family, not allowing that to take place?
First of all, if we're talking about the federal courts, you have to say, depends whose ox is being gored, whether people are angry at the federal courts.
That's very true.
Now, the opponents of the Equal Rights Amendment typically have fallen down on the side of keep the power away from the federal courts. Indeed, until a federal judge said the ERA is dead, then there was kind of a lull for a few weeks about.
We're happy to get that
but
report.
that's the kind of case the Supreme Court ought to decide. The Supreme Court ought to decide whether the 2/3 rule in Article 5 applied to the unfair ERA extension. That is really the kind of thing the Supreme Court ought to decide. But as far as what the alimony laws of the state of Alabama are, is the kind of case that the Supreme Court should not decide. And we do not want the Supreme Court saying what the marriage and divorce laws should be in all the states.
Well, first of all, we can't sit here and decide what the Supreme Court should do.
No, because they're going to do what they want to do.
Correct.
But we just don't want to give them authority to do any more than they're already doing.
We can, however, discuss...
Let me do this. Let me take a break, and we'll come back. I've got to shoot a little commercial in here. When we come back, we'll wrap this up, and I want to talk about the military. I want to talk about, are you wanting girls to be drafted and women to be drafted and wives to be drafted? Are you against that or for that, or
are you asking?
How do you stand on that? I'll ask you in just a minute. I won't get an answer, but I'll ask. I'll be right back. Stay with me, all right?
It takes up a body's strength to dig a foxhole in the frozen ground quickly, to cut a path through the thick jungles with the machete all day, or to cut lift and carry heavy logs to construct defensive bunkers, or fight a man with a bayonet, or to pull a man out of a crash-burning helicopter. And I'd just like to say one thing. I've got 2 sons and I've got 2 daughters. And I don't want to put my 2 daughters in a foxhole, and I don't want my 2 sons in that foxhole to have to depend on them. And if ERA is passed, we'll get just that.
Welcome back. I'm glad you're with us. We're with Ms. DeCrow and Ms. Schlafly. We're talking about the Equal Rights Amendment. Do you have a question?
Yeah, would you answer the question on alimony, please?
Would you answer the question on alimony? That's his question.
The question on alimony.
I ask you, are you for women having to pay alimony? And you never answer that question.
It would seem to me the same logic that would hold that if a husband had been supporting his wife and then they got divorced, he should continue to help her live. If in fact a woman is supporting her husband, it would seem to me, if you believe in equality, of course you would want her to be able to support her husband afterward. Let's say I'm supporting you, and then we get divorced. I should leave you to starve? That's ridiculous.
Well, I think it's a matter of state law. I think that
how many of you, let me ask, how many of you men would like to have a lady pay alimony? Raise your hand. Come on, you aren't there any of you men who would you like that? Wait, I can't hear you because I'm way over here, so let me crawl over there real fast. Da, 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 da. Yeah.
I agree with Karen. If it is a situation as she described, it seems like it would be fair. I agree that it is very rare that it would be a situation as she described, but it would seem like it would only be fair.
If you were in that situation, you divorced your wife and she had been supporting you, would you want alimony?
Only if I was, for some reason, not able to support myself.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, let me say, Richard, that I think it's a matter of state law. And prior to this Supreme Court decision, about half the states said alimony was something that goes only from an ex-husband to an ex-wife, and the other half, it could go either way. And I just think it should be a matter of state law, have it the way the people want it, and don't turn it over to the federal courts or the Constitution.
I hear you. Stand up.
It's my understanding from an article in the Yale Law Journal that homosexuals would be able to marry and adopt children. Would you address this, please, Phyllis?
Well, the word used in the Equal Rights Amendment is sex. And I think, I agree with that article, that if 2 men show up at the office of the city clerk and say, we want a marriage license, and she looks at them and says, I'm not giving it to you because you're both men, she would have denied a right on account of sex, and that is exactly what ERA forbids. So I think that is one of the things that would happen under ERA.
The other thing would be...
Do I get to answer that?
Yes,
I understand.
Yes, you do.
Being as churches fall under federal tax exemption, that I wonder if certain denominations, be they Baptist or whatever, would have to marry applying homosexuals, those who are applying to get married, because if they didn't, they would lose their federal exemption. That is another question I would like to have clarified. Phyllis?
Well, the whole area of homosexual, is the ERA, is it going to change the present law understanding that we have about equal rights for homosexuals in this country? Either one of you, Karen?
I'd like to answer that.
Yeah.
I believe the Yale Law Review article that you referred to was 1973. Since 1973, many states have adopted state equal rights amendments. I believe we have about 16 by my count, and perhaps somewhat less by another count. Now, if you want to see our homosexuals allowed to take out marriage licenses using state equal rights amendments, it would seem to me we could look at the states that presently have state ERAs and ask ourselves, in these states, are homosexuals getting married? The answer is no. Under one state ERA, I believe the law was challenged. I think it was the state of Washington. Was challenged under the state ERA, and the court held that the state ERA did not require that homosexuals...
Yeah, but there's a great difference on that, Karen, and I think you ought to face up to the fact that in the state of Washington, as in many states, the judges are elected. And that judge did not dare to grant a marriage license to homosexuals because he knew he wouldn't be reelected. Now, if you have ERA, all those decisions go into the federal courts, and we all know that the federal judges do whatever they want to do because they don't have to be elected. And I think that is a tremendous difference.
First of all,
Karen, let me ask you, would you like to see the Equal Rights Amendment applied to homosexual rights?
I don't think that the Equal Rights Amendment could be applied in the manner in which you state. And I think the proof that it hasn't been is, in fact, that in all these years we haven't seen the legalization of homosexual marriage. I have been in debates with anti-ERA people who've said it's because the gay community is holding back. They don't want to reveal this trump card. You know, they have the ace of trumps here, and they're just waiting because they don't want to kill chances for ERA. Well, I think that...
Well, they are smart, you have to admit.
Homosexuals are smart?
Sure, they're smart. Sure, they're smart. If I were running their political action, you know, they're very aggressively politically active, I'd say, hold off, don't do anything. And then once ERA passes, they would mount a tremendously well-financed Supreme Court test case, which they would hope would give them everything they haven't been able to get at state and local levels.
I would say anyone who is going to hold up equality between men and women under the Constitution of the United States on the slim chance that the homosexuals who have thus far been sitting quietly in the closet, not wanting to mention this, are going to suddenly emerge and be marrying each other under the ERA, I think that's an interesting fantasy. I don't think it's going to happen.
Phyllis, I would like to know, it sounds to me as if what you're saying is that states ought to have the right to discriminate against men or women. And I feel like as a member of this country, as a citizen of this country, that I ought to be protected no matter which state I live in, and that the laws that are discriminatory in those states ought to be changed, and that as a citizen I ought to have full rights no matter where I am.
Let me ask this before you. Let me ask this. You know how much TV time you're taking doing that anyway. Let me ask you this. How do you feel you're being discriminated against? Can I ask you that?
Well, in the state of Oklahoma, there are a number of laws, and I think it'd take too much time for me to recite to you
just tell me one. Tell me a couple. 3, 2,
well,
1.
The laws in this state cite that the woman's place of domicile is with her husband. She will live in a fashion in which he prescribes. No matter how much money the husband makes, he can decide at what level the wife lives in monetary terms, or what conditions she lives in.
How would that differ? I mean, if he doesn't have any more money and she doesn't have any more money, I mean, they may want to live up in the fancy part of town, but if they can't financially afford it, my question is this, how's the Equal Rights Amendment going to give them a better place to live? I don't understand that.
Oh, it's not going to give them a better place to live. That's up to them where they live.
But with equal rights, are you saying that you would like for the woman to be able to live wherever she wants to live, and the husband live wherever he wants to live?
The husband should not be able to prescribe to the woman how she's going to live because they are married, any more than she should be able to prescribe to him how he should live. And if he makes $100,000 a year and he tells her that she will live on $10,000 a year and live in, you know, on the other side of town.
No, but that's not the law.
My question
now,
is
in the state of Oklahoma, a woman who marries a man from out of state automatically has to start paying out-of-state tuition. Because the husband establishes
but the woman who marries the
domicile.
husband in-state automatically gets the benefit of in-state tuition, so it works both ways. But let me address the original problem you raised about whether we do want any laws that discriminate. And I think your perfect example of that is the draft law. Right now, 18-year-old men must register for the military draft. 18-year-old women do not have to register for the military draft. Now, that is an area where we clearly do want discrimination between men and women.
Wait. Do you want them to be able to discriminate on physical differences?
Sure, but physical differences have nothing to do with whether the husband's the head of the household or not.
So, I mean, you're for the Equal Rights Amendment, but you don't want them to be drafting women into the service, is that right?
Based on people's physical capabilities and the actual fact of how things are.
Don't go away. I've got to go away. Take a break. Let our stations identify themselves. I'll be back. Don't you go back. We're going to see who's going to get drafted. I've totally lost control. I'm glad you're back, all right?
Yeah.
They're all going crazy here. I want you to know that, all right? But I'm glad you're with me. Let's talk about the military draft. Karen, are you for mothers with little babies? Here's the question you always get, I know. Oh, it's a great question. What are you talking about? I'm about to ask it. Are you for mothers with babies being drafted and fathers being left at home to take care of their kids?
You left out the part about climbing through the barbed wire with baby.
Oh, sorry. Well, I'll put that in. I'll put that in. No, but listen now. Hear me.
I'll answer the question.
Okay, let me ask you a question. I'm serious about this question. This is an important question to me.
Of course it's an important question.
Here's a mother that's home and it's time to be drafted, and they've got to decide between the father and the mother. Now, I personally, that bothers me that there's a potential that the mother would have to be drafted and the father had to be left at home. I'm one
Well,
of
you
those
know how we
old-fashioned crazy
draft,
folks,
Richard.
right?
We draft by the lottery wheel.
My question is this. Are you for that type of, would you want that to take place? Would that bother you if that took place? Are you for discriminating and saying, hey, that mom cannot be drafted because she has a young child and the father's going to have to go serve? Are you for that? Or are you?
As Phyllis has just said, we draft with the lottery. And when we get finished...
If her number comes up first, you're for her going.
And after we get done picking the number, there are reasons why people get exempt.
Yes, but you know if we had ERA, you couldn't exempt mothers unless you also exempted fathers.
Well, then we could exempt fathers.
Oh, well, yes. But it all depends on the emergency as to
Richard, I
whether
would
you
like
make
to
fathers.
answer the question.
I would like for you to answer the question.
Okay. It seems to me the real people who should be answering this question are the 18 and 19-year-olds whose lives are indeed going
Yeah,
to
but
be.
they all
And-
think the service is
We
kind
may
of
be
a
answering
co-ed
it for
scout
them, though.
outing.
That's the only
Well, I
bad part of it.
believe that Phyllis would acknowledge that when we go to college campuses and talk about the Equal Rights Amendment and the draft comes up, and it always does, the males in the audience and the females in the audience are like 85% or more in definite agreement that it is terribly unfair to draft men and not to draft women.
Yeah, but they're all against the draft. And I think these young women on the college campuses think that they want their equal right to be a conscientious objector or go to Canada or walk around and say, yes, we won't go.
It falls down two ways. It depends maybe what type of college you're in. If you're in the type of college where everybody wants the right to go to Canada, the young women say we also have the right to go to Canada and make our opinions known as citizens. If we're in the kind of college where people are kind of gung-ho military and let's all go in the Army, the young women stand up there at the mics and they say we're full citizens.
Now, answer my question.
Yes.
Here's the mother with the baby, and the number comes up, and it's her number, and the husband's number has not come up. Now, I know personally, if this were me, okay, if this were my family, and my wife's number came up and my number didn't come up, I would say, wait, that's not fair. You can't come into my home and do this to my family. Hey, I'll go serve, but leave my wife here to take care of my little boys. This is ridiculous as far as I'm concerned.
Well, what would your little boys do if you're taken out of the home?
Well, I would much rather I would be taken out of the home with little boys than I would my wife be taken. And for me, you don't know me very well, for me to have to take care of those little boys, I mean, I don't.
You'd rather go out and
I
kill
would much
the
rather
enemy.
go out than kill the enemy than have to deal with the problems of that domestic
your wife
situation.
would not have an equal opportunity to survive on the battlefield. It's simply a plain fact that men, on the average, are bigger and stronger than women. Women only have about...
Are you for them taking the mother and leaving the father at home? That's a simple question.
You are setting up an issue that I think is not the question.
Well,
that
are you
should
for
be asked on the
taking
draft.
women and leaving men at home?
Okay.
Because that's, even if you didn't take
Saying
parents.
about the women going and not being strong enough. Just yesterday, a drill sergeant said to me, when I was in the Army, I only weighed 140 pounds. The women were coming in and they were set aside. They didn't have to pull this weight of a cable because it was too heavy for them. And he said, okay, so we're out in combat and I get shot and she's there. What are we going to do about that cable or whatever it is be hooked up then, because they're not strong enough and they don't know how to do it. So we're leaving ourselves in jeopardy.
I understand. Stand up here. You had something you want to say?
Yeah.
In response to that, I had something else to say, but in response to that, I would, well, rather than deal with that, let me deal with Phyllis and our situation on states' rights, okay? She says that she wants the state to decide every question.
I didn't say that. I said I wanted them to decide questions of family law like marriage, divorce, alimony, child custody.
Okay. But don't you think that there are fundamental principles of justice that should apply across this country? For example,
like freedom of speech and press and religion, and those are all fundamental questions. They are decided at the federal level.
Okay. What about blacks being in the back of the bus if the
That's
state passed a
decided
law
at the
that said the
federal
blacks
level.
have to be
That's fine. I'm not for taking anything
why-
away from anybody.
Okay, well then why do you have a different view in respect to this?
Well, because that's our federal system. The reason the American people have remained such a free nation is because we gave some powers to the federal government and some powers to the states. Now, I don't want the military to be handled by Oklahoma. I don't think Oklahoma should have a standing army, but I do think Oklahoma is perfectly capable of handling the laws pertaining to marriage, divorce, child custody, adoptions, and all
Why
those
not
things.
civil rights? He said the back of the bus, and you said no, that should be a
Civil rights question is moved to the federal level. I support that.
Well, why civil rights on race but not on sex?
Because it's a different question. Women have not been treated like blacks. I certainly do not subscribe to the view that women have been treated like blacks.
But if you're clear on the issue that civil rights is a federal issue when it comes to race questions, why, what arbitrary category would there be that...
It is because sex is simply a different matter from race. Just because we no longer have black schools and white schools, or black football teams and white football teams, that is absolutely no argument for saying we can't have female schools and male schools.
If Oklahoma decided women shouldn't vote, would you think that's all right?
No, we've moved that to the federal level. There's some questions at the federal level. I'm not for taking anything away from anybody. I am just opposed to giving the federal government more power than they already have, because they haven't made such a great job out of what the powers they've already got.
Here's another question.
I'm anxious to know what's going to happen to women should the ERA pass that have chosen and will choose to lead a life at home, raising children and delighting in that task as a co-partner with their husbands. What will happen if I choose not to go to the Army and someone next door chooses to go to the Army? I think that's fine. If she's a woman and cares to go to the Army or to the draft, that's great. She has that right to do that. I would hate to see the time that the government comes in and tells my husband and I what we can do and what we cannot do as a family. And this is my greatest concern about ERA. If I choose to do something, right now I have that right to do it. If my husband chooses to do something great for me and what I want to do, then he has that right now. I would hate to see the government come in and say they are going to take the place of the husband and the wife, and they're going to make our decisions for us, what we can do and what we can't do in our home. Right now, my husband's savings account is mine. And the IRA question was raised last week, that the woman was not going to get it. The husband has that, and the wife has that option to put $2,000 in the woman's account if she wants it in there, and just leave the husband $500 in his account as a total. But under the we have those options
the net
right
result
now.
of what you're saying is that you have all these choices today, and I agree with that. For those who want to serve in the Army, you can go sign up. The wife has the option. She can go into the workforce on the basis of equal pay for equal work, or she can be a homemaker with the law saying that the husband must support his wife. But I do see the ERA as something coercive. It says if people are going to be drafted, women have to be drafted. If fathers are going to be drafted, mothers have to be drafted. You can't have the laws that make it the obligation of the husband to support his wife. Therefore, you are really coercing the woman into saying she better build up some seniority and some job in the workforce.
I have one other question about Social Security.
Can you hold on just a second?
Yes.
I'll come back to you and to you and to you, and we're getting to everybody, and to you, Karen, and I'll be right back. Stay there. The organization. Welcome back. Good.
I have another question about Social Security. As a homemaker, I'm not required to pay Social Security, and yet, should my husband die, I would benefit from the Social Security that he has earned and paid in.
There's a whole multitude of things. You're talking about the whole family situation. And Karen, I want you to talk to this. Phyllis, do you want to go? The whole question, Social Security, all these things she's asking, the rights she has now as being protected in her family, for she and her husband to sit down and decide if she's going to go to work, if she's not going to go to work, if they're going to do this, if they're not going to do that. What about the equal rights in this?
Well, she raises several issues, all of which I think are interesting and deserve a response. First, you say you don't want the federal government coming in and saying into your little family unit and saying you're supposed to register for the draft and not your husband. Do you not find it intrusive that the federal government can in fact come in and tell your son he has to register, or your husband, or your father? I mean, it seems to me I know the feminists are accused of being man-haters. That's, one of the things that's said about us. That seems to me a very unequal kind of situation for somebody to say, I like the idea that the federal government can come in and tell my son what to do, but I certainly want my daughter to have the privilege of free choice. In other words, whether she wants to go down to the recruitment office. Why would a person make a distinction between daughters and sons?
I think we make that decision and that distinction because we think that God made men and women different, and men are simply bigger and stronger. And
some men are bigger and stronger.
The overwhelming majority of men are bigger and stronger, and on the average, they're 60% stronger than women.
And some military jobs require strength, and probably 85% of the military jobs are sitting behind computer terminals.
But the only purpose of those easy jobs in the military is to be ready for the crisis day when they can be put to the front lines. And we just don't think that it's fair at all to put the woman in that situation when she doesn't have the physical or the psychological or whatever strength to cope with that. And the evidence of all history is
Karen, what about the question of Social Security? This lady says if the Equal Rights Amendment passes, she'll have to pay into Social Security. Now she does not have to pay into Social Security being a housewife, right?
There are about 20 interpretations of what will happen to Social Security, and I don't think we have the time to go into them all. She does mention she likes the freedom to be a housewife. I just would make two brief comments on that. The first is that many women today do not have the freedom to be a housewife, not because of the women's liberation movement, not because of the Equal Rights Amendment, but because it costs a fortune to live. Many families can't live on one income.
Yeah, but ERA won't help them.
ERA will help them to the extent that when women are making more equal salaries with men, it will help the family situation.
But ERA isn't going to give them a raise.
Next item. She mentions one issue that I think is worth emphasizing on the show. You talked about something to do with credit and banks. I would like to say that one of the major arguments used against ERA is we really have all the laws we need. For example, the Equal Credit Law is brought out. We have laws which guarantee women and men equality when they walk into the bank. In fact, the present administration is trying to weaken or get rid of the equal credit opportunity laws. What does that mean? That means if we had a constitutional provision which would guarantee equality under the law, it wouldn't be up to the whim of Congress or a particular administration.
Now listen, I watch politics pretty closely, and I didn't hear anything about the present administration trying to weaken the equal credit laws.
Absolutely. That is
you can get credit if you have a job and pay your bills. That's all they need to know, that you're going to pay your bills in order to get credit.
Well, the current laws guaranteeing equal opportunity in education, guaranteeing equal opportunity in credit, guaranteeing equal opportunity in employment are all being reconsidered, and there are
No, that is
plans
absolutely
afoot.
untrue. What they are doing is reconsidering some of the regulations which are not authorized by the law. And under the Carter administration, they wrote a lot of arrogant, obnoxious regulations that were not authorized by the law. And what they
historical
the main
perspective,
one,
most of the quote obnoxious regulatory things were set up during the Nixon administration.
well, but what they're trying, the only thing they're trying to do in the education is simply move the enforcement in the area of employment over to the EEOC, where it ought to be, instead of trying to have two bureaus vying for enforcement of one particular aspect.
Ladies, persons, people.
I would like to ask Karen DeCrow about how the Equal Rights Amendment would affect education. I have two daughters in grade school, and I've had to go to the school a couple of times because I felt that they were not being treated equally.
How so?
Well, one case dealt with athletics, and this happened to be in the 4th grade. My daughter was not allowed to be on a team.
But what team?
On the volleyball team or the basketball team. And yet, for 4th grade boys, they were on the school basketball team. My daughter wanted to be on the basketball team.
On the boys' basketball team?
She wanted to play basketball.
With the boys?
She didn't care. She wanted to play basketball.
On the 9-year-olds basketball
And
team.
now let me finish.
I want to
She
find
wanted
out.
to
Let me
play
see. What's-
basketball.
okay, let me-
So I
the
went
boys'
into the
team.
principal. I went in to talk to the principal.
I'm for you, lady. Let me ask one quick question,
Well,
all
let
right?
me
Don't fight
finish
me.
my
Okay, let me
story.
ask you one question. Was it that they wouldn't even let her try out, or was it that she tried out and she didn't make the team? That's what I wanted to know.
No, she wasn't allowed to try
You can
out.
try
The,
out,
the
all right.
girls in the 4th grade were not told that there was any team that they could be on.
I follow.
And yet the boys in the 4th grade were
They all
told
got
that,
to try it and
that
she
they
didn't.
could be on the basketball team. So I went in to see why this was. And
What'd they say?
there's an Equal Education Act, and they had a manual, and he looked in it, and he said, well, boys and girls in 4th, 5th, and 6th are eligible for athletics. And yet, the girls in the 4th grade had not been informed that they could go out for any team.
Did your girl get to go out?
After I complained about it, she did, and she went to the volleyball team.
Do you
which
think if
was
the Equal
girls'
Rights
team.
Amendment were passed, do you think you wouldn't have to complain?
Well, that's what I'm asking Karen DeCrow.
I mean, even if it were law, you'd still have to complain. We'd still have lawsuits. We'd
First of
still
all,
have.
what was being done in that school is presently illegal under Title IX.
Right.
To repeat myself, Title IX is under big attack. The people who currently are making regulations or determining how regulations are enforced on what goes on in the schools, kindergarten through 12th grade, are now going back to the single-sex idea rather than to 9-year-old children are 9-year-old children. And it's really, if you were going to distinguish between 9-year-old girls and boys, I guess you'd have to say all the girls are bigger and stronger, so they're the ones that, you know, should be out there playing. That's, of course, ridiculous. But the fact is, Title IX is under big attack. And just as opponents of the ERA say, well, you have everything you need to guarantee equality in education. You have the Title IX amendments. In fact, come around in 8-9 months, you might not have the Title IX amendments.
Well, now there are all kinds of exceptions in Title IX for people who like sex discrimination in certain aspects of education, such as single-sex schools and colleges, fraternities, sororities, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, American Legion, Girls State, Boys State, mother-daughter, father-son school events, separate sex dormitory living facilities, and the contact sports. And I think that these things are not immoral. They're not illegal under Title IX. ERA would make them unconstitutional.
You think they'd be done away with
They
the
would
ERA?
be done away with under ERA because there are no exceptions in ERA. And I don't see anything the matter with those aspects of sex discrimination for those people who want them.
Okay, I'll be back. I'll be back. I'm catching it from both sides here. Thank you. We were talking to the ERA. The Reds are saying I'm not giving them enough time. The Greens are saying I'm not giving them enough time. And so I'm taking all the time myself. Red, what do you want to ask?
Hi, Richard.
Hi.
Having worked in opposition to the ERA for many years, we've always been told that there is absolutely no connection between the Equal Rights Amendment and abortion. And yet, to my knowledge, there are already 2 states that have state ERAs where the ACLU has used the state Equal Rights Amendment in an effort to fund abortions with state monies. And I would like some comments on this.
Well, the ACLU did file a brief in both those states, Massachusetts and Hawaii, arguing that the equality principle of ERA in Section 1, equal rights and all that, required the state to pay state funds for abortions. Now, we didn't get a decision from the court that ruled on that one way or the other, but we sure know how the ACLU will argue under ERA. And they would then, under ERA, make their claim in federal courts. And I think there's a very good chance that what they would do would be to declare the Hyde Amendment unconstitutional. All they have to do is the Hyde Amendment was upheld 5-4 under the present Constitution, and all they would have to do would be to convince one judge who's already pro-abortion that ERA would make the difference. And there again, it's simply a matter of, do you want the federal courts to make all these decisions?
Karen.
As a matter of fact, the Massachusetts Supreme Court decided that case, but they didn't use the state ERA. So a court has decided it hasn't used that case.
In your mind, do you see an interlink between abortion, Equal Rights Amendment at all?
No, I don't.
None whatsoever.
No,
You
the only connection that I could possibly see is that many, not all, many of the people who are anti-ERA are against a woman's right to choose abortion, and many, not all, of the people who support ERA are in favor of a woman's right to choose abortion. I don't think there's a legal connection, and in fact, no court has held that there is.
No, but the lawyers have argued that it is, and I think that ERA would just give them a field day for litigation.
You're a lawyer. You would not use that in a sex discrimination case. You do this all the time. You would not use a national equal rights amendment as a vehicle to guarantee a woman the right to abortion?
Absolutely, you couldn't use an ERA, a vehicle to guarantee a woman's right to choose an abortion. Where it was used, although it didn't succeed, was saying that if legal medical procedures, which abortion is today in the state of Massachusetts, can be funded for some things, then it is sex discrimination to take something which only applies to women, a legal medical procedure, and say that it can't be used.
And you do not see that being used nationally?
Well, sure they
Not
use
to
it.
show that abortion is legal, to show
that abortion funding is required.
Medicaid funding.
Okay.
But are we playing semantics here? I mean, don't you think honestly that if ERA were passed, it would be used to say, hey, look, the federal government has, if it's going to fund other medical necessities, it's got to fund the Equal Rights Amendment?
No.
It's got to fund abortion, not the
Well,
abortion.
it would certainly be used by lawyers in trying the case. Now, you can argue about what the Supreme Court's going to decide. Who knows?
I hear you. Where am I? Camera 2? Bye-bye. I thank you for being here. Tomorrow we're talking about...